Good evening, everyone. We will begin in just a couple minutes here. We have a lot of participants still joining our call, so we want to give everybody another minute or two to get on. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Dr. Horton, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank you each all for joining us tonight as we are talking about, we're having our town hall for the many responses and questions that we've gotten from families about our return to school plan. We really appreciate the feedback. It has challenged our team to really think differently. But before we go any further, I would like to let everyone know that Manuel Alaman will be translating on another channel. So please, for interpretation, Manuel will be leading that. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Horton. Buenas noches, gracias por acompañarnos en esta reunión comunitaria. Si alguien necesita el servicio de traducción al español, por favor, sigan las instrucciones. Aparecerá en unos momentos un botón, una función en algún lugar de su pantalla, dependiendo del dispositivo electrónico que estén usando. Aprieten, por favor, esa opción y me escucharán a mí traducir para ustedes en otro canal. No escucharán mi voz directamente de la pantalla de la computadora, sino que verán al Dr. Horton hablar y yo estaré traduciendo para ustedes en otro canal. Gracias. Thank you, Dr. Horton.
Thank you. Cesar Chavez was best known, one of his well-known quotes, he said, "Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore." That quote means a lot because as we're journeying into unveiling of our plan, there's a lot of thought, a lot of effort, and as we speak about equity in our priorities, decisions were made grounded by those values. There's no roadmap for what we're going to face. We're all facing tough decisions and what doesn't feel like good options, but understanding we can make a lot of right decisions, but definitely we don't want to make the wrong one. I am thankful for the incredible team that I have, the union leadership, our school board, all 5 unions, as a matter of fact. It's been collaborative, inclusive, and solution focused. School leaders focus on supporting their communities, and I appreciate them all for their value. I would also like to say that we've had some other partnerships that we've shared, and I also want to send a shout out to our collaborative partners with the City of Evanston, Northwestern University, McGall YMCA, Family Focus, and the Wild U to combine resources and potentially to provide academic interventions for our students. More information will be shared over the next few weeks with that. Our responses represent our best thinking in the moment. And with alignment to ISB and IDPH guidelines. Continued collaboration with health officials, leadership, and representatives from all bargaining groups is a top priority for us. Guidance and plans subject to change based upon updated guidelines, health metrics, continued discussion, and bargaining with our unions. In the past 2 weeks, We have received over 1,200 questions. Yes, you heard that right. 1,200 questions from both staff and family. While a number of these questions were redundant, many weren't. This is a representative of the monumental task in front of us all. We will answer as many questions as we can tonight, working on finalizing an FAQ for our website that will continue to update in the upcoming dates and upcoming weeks and months. We will continue to prioritize safety and high quality learning experiences. Please make sure that you are also are aware as we are getting ready to make our choice by July 31st. Instructions were sent to your email and also available on the District 65 website at district65.net. Melissa, take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Horton. So we received hundreds of questions from our families and staff members across the district related to our return plan and learning options. So as mentioned, we are going to get through as many as we possibly can tonight and are going to work to continue to provide answers that will be made available on our District 65 website. Before we go ahead and get started, I'd like everybody on the panel to just go ahead and introduce themselves so people know who y'all are.
All right, Superintendent Dr. Horton.
Good evening, everyone. Latarsha Green.
Good evening. My name is Beatrice Davis. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Good evening. I'm Andalib Kelgani. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Schools with a focus on the elementary schools, and my pronouns are he, his.
Good evening. My name is Terrence Little, and I'm Assistant Superintendent of Schools with my focus on middle school, and my pronouns are he, him, and his.
You're muted.
I think we're able to hear Stacy, so I'll go ahead. I'm Romy DeCristofaro. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hey, Stacy, your mic doesn't seem to be working. I don't know if you want to try and log back in and out to join us. Dr. Stacy Beardsley, our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction. And I am Melissa Messenger, Director of Communications, pronouns she, her, hers. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started with the questions that were submitted. First question. What metrics will be used to determine whether it is safe to move forward with in-person learning in late September? And are all stakeholders in agreement with these metrics?
So we've been in discussion with the city health officials. Ike has been really helpful for us. We've also been in conversations with North Shore Hospital and other key medical professionals. So the metrics that we'll be looking at is test positivity 7-day rolling average, which we're looking at Region 10. And Region 10, while we are okay in Evanston, but we have to remember the reason why our rates are so low in Evanston is because we have been intentional and strategic about how we're placing our students and our staff. So we are going to be sure that those metrics are reasonable within a definitely a lower rate than what they currently exist in Region 10. And we'll be forming a committee to talk about the actual specifics of that measurement. We'll also look at staff availability for in-person school, which is another measurement that we'll use.
Thank you, Dr. Horton. Next question. Will District 65 service IEPs in both the in-person and remote pathways? Will children receive the minutes specified in their IEPs?
So regardless of the learning path you select, your child will have access to IEP services. State guidelines from the spring have shifted, increasing the time requirement for student engagement to a minimum of 5 hours a day. Because of this new guidance, when school resumes, IEP services and supports will more closely mirror services in the IEP. All students will start with an individual remote learning plan that will continue to guide services and supports for students who remain in remote learning. Then for students who transition to in-person learning, there will be added opportunity for in-person instruction that will be built into those plans. Though even if at school, there will likely be some virtual and teletherapy opportunities.
Thank you, Romy. Next question. Why July 31st as a deadline for making selections? This seems early and conditions may change significantly by September. This makes it really difficult on parents. What options do we have for changing our child's learning pathway?
Thanks for that question. I'm going to refer to a document that we shared with our community in the Reimagining. So we recognize that the 31st is a challenging deadline. It has some technical implications for us as a district. One being how we roster students will help us determine placement of teachers, assignment of teachers and staff. It'll also have implications for rostering students for technological resources. And so that has been a deadline that has been put in place to ensure that all of those behind the curtain systems can be up and ready for our remote learning path to take off on the date that it is scheduled to begin. I want to just remind families that in the Reimagining document, we did share some information about how to change the learning option. So to go from in-person to remote learning, we are asking that that decision can be made at any time as long as the request can be honored. And if you would afford 2 to 3 business days for the change to be effective. And that is because we still have the technical resources that need to be updated to reflect that change. The difference for moving from remote learning to in-person learning, as you can imagine, has a different implication on community building as well as classroom sizes and accommodations. And so we ask that those changes would be submitted with a 2 weeks notice given, and that those would be taking place during the trimester shift. So that is a consistent message that we want to just get across, is that you have the right to switch those options, but we have a little bit of technical aspects that have to take place to help afford the shift occurring. This request should be made to the principal if moving from remote to in-person, so that we're able, and there'll be a form to accommodate that. So more information will be forthcoming.
Thank you, Dr. Green. What services and supports will be available for English learners on both pathways?
So emerging bilingual services will continue to be available for students regardless of the pathway chosen by the family. However, it is important to emphasize again that our emergent bilingual students will be prioritized when we are able to return for in-person learning.
Thanks, Romy. Will there be any opportunities for remote students to gather outdoors and in person? Can educators meet with their class for school-based activities outdoors?
So I think this is an important question, especially when we're thinking about the culture and the climate we want to create for all of our students. And so in thinking about this, I do want to say that we are reviewing all the safety guidelines around social distancing, around our staffing numbers, to really develop a plan to be able to support this kind of experience. So there will be opportunities where we are looking to see where classes could be held outside, potentially with proper social distancing and adequate staff supervision. Of course, this would be weather permitting, and also once we have determined, again, our student schedules and our staffing numbers.
Thanks, Dr. Kilgatti. Will students who are remote be in separate classrooms from students who are in person? If not, will teachers be teaching students who are remote and in person simultaneously? I would like to understand if students in the remote and in-person options will be learning the same materials at the same time.
All right, Melissa, can you hear me this time?
Yes, we can.
All right, my apologies. I'm sorry. Zoom has a habit of kicking out at the wrong time on me. So let me see what I can do to answer this question for us. So we are looking at a couple different options specifically. There are some situations where students may be learning simultaneously at home with students that are in on-site classrooms. As we're looking at this, we're looking at what seems to be most developmentally appropriate. I think our older students can manage that environment better than our younger students. So we're more likely to keep our learning environments separate in our younger grades. For the latter part of the question, students will be learning the same materials and generally the same content, whether you are on-site or remote. And the way we're going to manage this is we want to give educators flexibility to be responding to student needs while still holding on to pacing. So classrooms may not be in the exact place day in, day out, but at key markers through the year, the classrooms will be asked to be at the same place. So we'll be looking to finish units at the same time. We'll be looking to do some of the learning celebrations at the same time, while giving educators the flexibility to adjust instruction to meet students' needs within reason.
Thank you, Dr. Beardsley, for that informative answer. I think we have another question that's going to be coming back to you. What has been done to ensure that e-learning is more engaging, more standardized across teachers, and involves more face time with students? More interaction with teachers will make more engaged learners. This spring, e-learning was very spotty and seemed teacher dependent, with some teachers offering more face time and seeming a little bit more comfortable with the technology. That was a question from Molly Balash, a Kingsley parent.
So there are a couple different pieces to that question. As you can see in the materials that we've put out, we really are looking to increase the amount of live educator engagement. In the younger grades, we're looking at that morning meeting to build community. We're looking at the end of day connection for students to be able to reconnect on learning, ask questions, understand what's coming in the next day. And then we have moved our instructional time from the ISB guidance in the spring to a minimum of 5 hours. We're really looking at a full instructional day for the fall. And that will include lessons that are both recorded and live that will be coming out in the content areas at various points in the day. And then we will make those recorded so that students have an opportunity to listen to them at different times if they are not able to make anything that is live.
Thank you. When will parents of children with IEPs be contacted about updating their individual remote learning plan? And when will case managers be assigned?
Sure. So your child's case manager or a school representative will contact you in the beginning of the school year to touch base and to schedule a meeting to update or develop your child's individualized remote learning plan. We realize how important it will be to make this initial connection early. So our goal is to be able to provide educators with time after they start, but before the first day of school to connect with parents. Because we are still receiving information regarding our staffing capabilities, and assigning case managers is going to take a little longer than typical, it is most likely that case managers will be assigned closer to the first day of school.
Thanks, Romy. Seth Thompson from Haven asked, what e-learning training have teachers received, and will they be using the same curriculum?
Okay. So e-learning training was ongoing in the spring focused on tools. And then we are going to make some modules and some options available to educators again in August. And then when we return for our professional learning days, we will be shifting to really a focus on what does high quality remote learning look like? And that would be focused on student engagement, assessing student understanding, responding to data to do small groups. And the learning strategies will then be connected to the tools underneath that will help our educators to do that work.
Thank you. A parent shared, I strongly believe that 5.5 hours of online learning for a 6-year-old is detrimental to their development. I don't think that much screen time or alone learning time is healthy. Neither will I be able to commit to that amount of time each day for remote. Is that an unrealistic expectation that I hold, or is that unrealistic to expect of a 6-year-old?
So this is the dilemma that I think many people are in with young students. The learning that we are going to provide is going to be a balance of some online learning, some activity that they can do away from screens, and realistically, the level of support that each student requires does vary based on the students themselves. But I will say that a 6-year-old will require, over that course of the day, some degree of support. It's not a reasonable expectation that the educator will be keeping them fully engaged for that full branch of time.
Thanks, Stacy. In order to help families plan better and understand what the pathway for remote learning looks like, can you provide greater detail on what the average day will look like for a student, both in elementary and in middle school, especially as it relates to live or asynchronous instruction?
Sure. So our live school day is going to look and feel a bit different from previous years, because we will need to have modified routines for entering the school, for social distancing, for hand washing, and mask breaks. That being said, the general structure will still feel somewhat the same. Kids will experience different content throughout the day. They will have shorter windows of instruction, and they'll be released into doing learning activities. Another place that will feel different is that kids will not move around the building nearly as much. Lunch will be delivered to the classrooms. Specials would be received in the classrooms. And so they will be experiencing some of the same learning, in most of the same learning, but the movement around the building and the engagement with different adults will be less. And then remotely, essentially, the remote instruction, as we mentioned in the elementary, will have kind of the beginning and the end of day check-in, and then there will be a regular routine or schedule for the students for when they are joining other instruction throughout the day. As we consider screen time guidelines, we also want to think about shorter instructional lessons, and we've been investing in different curriculum materials with more video supports so that students can receive that and be released to do some independent work so educators can do small groups. And so that experience will vary a little bit remotely depending on what students' needs are.
Thank you, Stacy. For schools that have one strand of TWE, how will the teachers be able to teach both in person and remote? Will the students who choose remote learning start off the year with their current TWE classmates and teacher, then switch to a new remote TWE teacher, and then go back to their regular TWE teacher once they go back to in person? Can you help us understand more about what this looks like?
Sure. So we don't have an answer for this question yet, but there is a group that is currently working on a plan for what this would look like and to answer these questions. To make sure that we are considering all the options and perspectives, our group does include a variety of stakeholders that includes, but is not limited to, teachers, principals, and some parents who are a part of BPAC. One idea we are exploring includes having teacher partners and making co-teaching more available. Our goal is to provide as smooth of a transition for our TWE students and maintain relationships for everyone.
Thanks, Romy. Question from Michael Davis at Lincoln. Will the board regulate higher standards to provide all students with the same level of virtual teaching across District 65? We are looking for weekly class sessions with a social worker and other specialized teacher, daily meetings with the classroom teacher, and daily live lessons. In particular, will Lincoln Elementary School have at least one meeting a day between the teacher and students, preferably two? A critical element of school for my children, grades 2 and 5, is the class community and the relationship with the teacher. Stacy, could you share a little bit more about what this looks like, not only at Lincoln, but across the district?
Of course. So we are working on defining a consistent set of expectations and structures for both our on-site learning and our remote learning. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be the morning meeting, there will be an end of day community connection, there will be ongoing instruction during the day. Educators are being provided in some cases videos around some lessons. So the live engagement may be more around small groups than instruction, because that is a more meaningful interaction for our students. So, I think the kind of heart of the question is that there are going to be a set of clear expectations for the way in which we spend our learning time on a daily basis. There will be a minimum of two times a day live contact, and there will be an expectation of more content and structure for our learning, for our learners to be accessing their learning and to be supported by educators in our district.
Thank you. What sort of assessments will be done at the start of the school year so that teachers can tell children where children are on their learning curves and where they might need extra help or extra challenge?
So we are in the process of finalizing our assessment plan for the year. We are looking to define assessments at the beginning of the year, regardless of whether students are remote or on site in the buildings. And most likely that will be a computerized assessment across the vast majority, if not all of the grades, in order to be able to get some immediate information about students' baseline skills. But most importantly, we will be looking for our educators to be building relationships and assessing students in our authentic work so that we can balance that information and begin to teach to students' needs.
Thanks, Stacy. Glad to have you back on the call, because it seems like a lot of questions are coming your way, but we have another one. Will teachers be asked to teach both remotely and in person, or are there separate teachers for the different pathways?
So we are looking at a combination of things right now. And based on information we're getting from families and family needs, as well as educator needs, we are going to build the schedules that best meet our learners' needs. There will be some educators that are probably teaching on-site only. There will be some educators that are probably teaching remote only. And there may be some situations where teachers are teaching across both. But as we try to meet the needs of both our students and our educators, there is going to need to be some flexibility.
Thank you. How will a school or the district figure out a safe in-person learning plan if they don't have room to accommodate all families? Who will get prioritized? If I choose in-person learning, do I risk taking a spot away from another family? Or worse, do I risk taking a spot away from a family of color, family whose child has an IEP or 504 plan, or an essential workers family? There was a question from Nicole from.
Thanks, Nicole. You are correct. And fortunately, we did some brainstorming or idea generation through our compression process. The team that was focused on scenario C generated ideas for this exact purpose and reason. One, we wanted to adhere to the guidance from ISB in relation to prioritized groups, but we also wanted to make sure that we are adhering to and speaking truth to power on our commitment to equity. And so for that reason, the team was charged with answering and generating ideas for if schools open for some students with significant safety, hygiene, and social distancing, how might we go about deciding which students are prioritized to safely re-enter and who would be prioritized? The list that was generated I believe held true to the values that our community values. Students receiving free or reduced lunch, Black and Brown students, students who received an I or less than 50% on their report cards, emerging bilinguals, students with IEPs. There are also other categories in relation to students who were not performing according to reading or math grade level expectations, and students with no comorbidity factors. Please note that those ideas are not in vain, and additional data and information is helping us to determine how we can go about servicing as many of our students as possible. But thankfully, we do have information that was jointly developed across our community in terms of who those prioritized students would be.
Thanks, Dr. Green. Question from Shantae. Just curious to know if there are any plans surrounding access to the teacher for remote learners and virtual socialization opportunities with peers.
Melissa, I'll speak to that. So yes, we've talked about the access to teachers. We are also, as we think about our technology tools for the fall, Zoom will be available for breakout spaces and small groups. Meet is also going to have that functionality as we move into the fall. And so there will be opportunities for students to be interacting in small groups. We have not yet fully thought about solely socialization opportunities, and that may be something that we need to continue to think about.
Thanks, Stacy. Question, will survey information from parents and staff be made publicly available?
Yes, and I'm going to do my own translation here. C, the remote learning survey generated from students, parents, and teachers, as well as the return to work survey will be shared on the website before the end of this week. We are looking currently and analyzing our most recent survey with the return to schooling decisions. Those will be analyzed and shared as soon as possible in the same way and format. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Green. Yes, that survey information will be available on our District 65 website, which is district65.net. Will students who are participating in remote learning still have access to school libraries or be able to check out books?
So we are still assessing whether we will reopen our libraries for book distribution in the fall, physical book distribution. We are expanding our digital book resources so that students will have access to the digital book resources at a minimum. If we do open the libraries for physical book distribution, remote students will have the same access as our on-site students.
Thank you. How will students with 504s and IEP requiring small group instruction and teacher prompts be supported? That was a question from another parent at Lincoln.
Thank you. So there will continue to be opportunities for small group instruction for students, whether in person or remotely. In terms of providing teacher prompts, this will be dependent on the setting and the student. If learning in person, teachers and staff will need to rely more on visual and auditory prompts and avoid tactile prompts, such as a touch on the shoulder. In terms of virtual learning, we may need to get more creative, using technology to again provide visual and or auditory prompts. These are some of the decisions that will need to be discussed, fine-tuned, and determined by the school team that knows the student best. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Romy. Next question. For the younger grades, specifically K through 2, how much adult involvement at home is expected given what's envisioned for the remote learning content? Asked another way, is it feasible to assume a parent can work from home full-time, 9 to 5, and passively oversee their children for basic safety, while the child is actively and self-sufficiently engaged in school activities for several hours? Or will they likely need pretty involved parent engagement and help, which means working parents will have to either hire help, reduce hours, fall behind at work, or help their child outside of work hours, find a nice person who will help their child for free, or have their young kids figuring it out. Thank you to that parent for all of those suggestions.
Yeah, and I do know this is a challenge. One thing that we are trying, so for our younger students, again, we are, we're going to be working with a kindergarten team to think about how we balance learning activities, how we embed activities that are away from screens, activities that would have some degree of independence. So we are trying to design with some of these things in mind. Young students, however, do require some degree of support. And so we will make videos that are recorded so that if there are times when support could be available at a different time and day, that families may be able to access some of that at that time. So we will try to design some flexibility to be able to create some different opportunities if a student does require support.
Thanks, Stacy. So last week, the district released the Reimagining Education document, which was over 20 pages. And the question is, how will the district put this guidance into action and really help parents and teachers to understand the operational requirements? For example, how will lunch be handled? How will classrooms and spaces be prepared?
Yeah, so this is a daunting task. We've been doing a lot of strategizing, and we understand the most important part after you strategize is the execution. So one of the first things we're doing, buildings have been prepared and getting cleaned since the spring. I made a statement last week, and I want to provide some clarity that when I say the buildings we didn't have the buildings ready, they were not ready because we didn't know how many staff we were going to have returning, how many students we were going to bring back to the building. That's the language in which that we were not prepared comment came from. But I would say we're forming what we call a Let's Get It Right committee. Every single school, ideally, the way this will be designed, we're in conversation with the union leadership, just started that discussion yesterday. So we will have principals, APs, and they will select roughly between 7 to 10 additional staff members from their building that will receive guidance from central office. I'll use this as an example. So the first week, what we may do is set this up where they have to go in and clearly mark 6-foot spacings, stairway pathways, entry into in and out of the building, and that they'll receive materials and equipment from us. And then at the end of the week, those individuals will come back together. We'll have discussions about challenges or areas for support that's needed, and then we will be sure that work is done. The following week, we'll then go into, for example, making sure that every classroom has clearly marked the maximum amount of individuals to be allowed in that class according to the CDC guidelines. And we will work on this, and the goal would be to get our buildings fully situated and within a 4-week cycle regarding structure, placement, and all of the operational structures that we take for granted throughout the course of the school year. The question about lunch, this is still happening now. There's still discussions about how we're going to handle lunch. We don't want our teachers having to spend 5.5 or 6 hours straight without any time to eat their lunch or prep. So there's some discussions that's continuing to happen right now. And then when we talk about the classroom spaces, one thing we're getting ready to do is to reach out to our teachers and our paraprofessionals and ask them to go into their schools in a structured way over these next couple of weeks and to tag and to remove any personal items. Because as we get ready, as the Let's Get It Right team come in, we don't want to misplace and remove anything that's personal or put it in a place where it will be lost. So there's an operation manual that's also being designed and built as well, in which we will operate from. It will be a standalone document, and that will be completed shortly. We've done a ton of strategic planning around the return. Now it's time for us to put all of these pieces into action. And this is how we're going to operationalize our plan.
Thank you, Dr. Horton. A question from a parent at Washington Elementary. Will learning pods be assigned by the school, teacher, or self-formed? Are kindergartners required to have a learning pod? more explanation of learning paths and expectation of use will be really helpful.
I'll speak to this one a little bit. So as a district, what we are doing is for our learners that are going to be on site, we are assigning them to smaller cohorts or classrooms. We are assigning our students that are going to be remote to remote classrooms. We are not going to, as a district, we're not going to reach beyond the school to connect or manage pods within the community if that's the direction of this question. So we will provide communication, we will provide learning materials and supports, but our role is going to be to really think about the learning pairings within the building and providing the supports to families needed to support learning outside of the building.
Thanks, Stacy. I think that's helpful. Next question, if students will be staying in their classroom for instruction rather than changing classrooms, how does this affect students that have an IEP and work with other faculty members, such as a speech language pathologist or teacher, social worker, special ed teacher, etc.?
I'll take this one. All right, so we'll have safety protocols in place that will allow students to continue to have inclusive opportunities and participate in all the related services and supports. We are planning to minimize exposure for students and staff by assigning each student with an IEP to a general education cohort or pod. Students will be seen with other students from their learning cohort as much as possible. Staff will also be provided with enough PPE so that if they need to change in between students, they can do that. And hand washing will be required in between student groups. Within the building, students will receive both virtual and in-person instruction to try to minimize that exposure. But the specific logistics are still being worked out as decisions are made.
Thanks, Romy. Question from Michelle Mills. Will the district guarantee that there will be a spot for in-person learning for every child who wants it without diminishing the current 4-day full-time schedule?
Thank you for that question. And the answer to that is no, we can't not guarantee that. One of the top priorities for us, period, is health and safety for all. So our students and also our staff. We have received quite a bit of information regarding our staff ability to return to work for various reasons about safety of themselves and family members at home. So what we are doing, as Dr. Green spoke about earlier, we are actually going to be targeting with our numbers currently, unless something changes, we will be targeting our dependent learners. Those are students that are marginalized first, as far as how we will serve them. And I want to make sure that I say this. This is what we are in a pandemic, and we also know that everyone is affected by this differently. But there was a pandemic before this that was inequity and racism and classism and all of these other things. And so I just want to make sure that as we're making a decision, and there's no decision that's going to make everyone happy. We understand that, but we are trying to support every single child to the best of our ability. And we can't allow political capturing to take over our decision-making regarding how we return our students to school. We have to make sure that students who've been oppressed, that we don't continue to oppress them and we give them opportunity. We also want to be sure that there's no lack of oversight and support of how we do the structure. This is why we've taken a lot of time to plan it. We don't want this to be something that's not put together with the highest quality. And we have been intentional about partnering with our unions, talking with our parents, our community partners, our board members. So we wanted to have that. And then the last thing, I want to be clear. I don't want to leave this left for interpretation that if we had the staff that allowed in the space to bring back as many families who choose to send their children back to our district, we would definitely do that. But we also know that the reality is that we have staff members, we have families who are not comfortable, not ready, and our space it's limited to some degree. So we're going to prioritize certain populations of students first. And then, and I feel safe saying that in this community of Evanston, this is what I've seen and I've heard for quite some time, that this is a community that's about equity for our Black and Brown students, for our special education students, for our LGBTQ students. We know that this is important work, and we're going to prioritize that. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Horton. Question from Mary Foster at Lincolnwood. For in-person learning, will there be N95 masks provided to kids and teachers? How will cleaning be approached?
So I'm happy to answer that question. Also, I know that our Chief Financial Officer, Rafael Obafemi, has been working very hard on these questions around our building guidelines around operations and safety. So what I do know is that we do know that there is a shortage of N95 masks, and that many of those have been reserved for medical facilities, and that those have been actually reserved for medical facilities. So in our case, we will be providing, though, medical grade masks for staff and students. We are also highly aware that in order to maintain the sustained hygiene and disinfecting in our building, we have developed very tight cleaning guidelines in line with the CDC protocols that we plan to follow. Our plan is that there will be periodic cleaning throughout the day of high-touch areas such as doors, railings, light switches. Also, we're asking that custodial managers in each building that we have currently will have a checklist that will be able to maintain a real close attention on that those are actually being done and that those are completed after each cleaning round.
Thank you, Dr. Calgatti. Stacy, can you talk a little bit more about the middle school schedule for in-person learning? Will students be in pods, and what specific steps are being taken to limit exposure with so many students in the building?
Sure. So one of the things, so we know that the word pod is being used quite a bit in the community. So we're trying to use, as we're scheduling, we're thinking about cohorts and class sections. So that's the language we're using. Every child will be assigned to a cohort. That cohort is a smaller group of students with whom are all assigned the same set of teachers. And the teachers will move from one class section to the next to teach in that smaller cohort. And so previously in middle school, you might have walked from the first floor to the third floor to the second floor and been in class with upwards of 100 different kids or 150 kids in a day. In this situation, we're actually down to groups somewhere between 36 and 48 for your cohort. And the educators, the current plan is that the educators would move to the kids in the classrooms to minimize movement. And movement outside for breaks and for PE will be at times where we're limiting hallway traffic. So we really are trying to pay attention to safety first and to limiting contact and exposure.
Thanks, Stacy. Question from Jeannie Brunel at Chute Middle School. If everyone is starting remote, but then you opt for in-person learning, do you have to switch teachers?
So we are working hard to design something that would not require a switch in teachers. We are looking to get people's learning selection, and as Dr. Horton mentioned, we will schedule the best we can based on preference and priority. And then ideally, we will have you assigned to your teacher for the beginning of remote and on site from the beginning of the year.
Thanks, Stacy. So we've got back-to-back questions coming in from our Chute family. Would the administration consider holding class instruction outside, perhaps? I know there's plenty of acres of land nearby Chute Middle School. I have heard from a few African-American parents of struggling students from different schools across our district during e-learning. Would you kindly consider having a school support person from each school and or grade level who may check in with each and every struggling student and or parent on a weekly basis? In this way, any issues, concerns, or problems with families may be handled right away rather than waiting until report card time.
So I want to thank Tracy Powell for this question, and I want to just continue building on something that Dr. Horn said earlier about our pandemic related to really equity, especially around our instructional priorities. And I want to connect that to the question and just say that we have a commitment to instructional equity, particularly around our racial lines, and we really want to continue to we need to do better by the work that needs to happen for our students. And so part of the answer that I'm going to begin with is just saying that we've worked very hard to improve the curricular resources that are going to be available for delivering math and literacy instruction, and so that our teachers are going to be more prepared for that from a remote space, which is what one of the main concerns was here. Core instruction will be delivered at least 3 days a week, and blocks are to begin for small, and there will also be time for small group instruction, which is one of our priorities. We're also expanding the tools available for students to be able to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways, whether it's audio, visual, or writing and drawing. And we want to increase the way in which that we progress monitor. We have also expanded our web-based tools to be able to support independent learning and in reading and math in the areas of fluency, conceptual understanding, and comprehension. And some of the tools that you may have heard of already are SD Math, Khan Academy, IXL, Reading, A to Z, Newzilla, and iStation. I want to also add to this that, as a district, you may have heard the term MTSS, so which is our multi-tiered system of support. So it is important that that this system continue to exist, and we have this system to ensure that all of our students are going to get the supports they need. This year, we're rolling out a new spotlight system and 6 systems, which I reviewed at the board meeting last week, but I'll highlight these 6 systems because I think all of our principals went through a training 2 weeks ago where we engaged in really deepening our shared language for instructional equity and consistency across our schools. So these 6 systems are, number 1, standards, and system 1 is standards and curriculum implementation. Our second one is system 2, which is the effective use of data. Our third system is how we plan, collaboration, planning, and instructional planning. System 4 is about how we're monitoring our students' progress and the work that they're producing. So we can't simply ask students to produce work or to engage in learning, and then we're not monitoring that. System 5, which is really directly related to this question, which is really the academic and behavioral supports that are in place. How are we really monitoring the supports that students have? What are the kinds of supports? We are looking at potentially for these cohorts that Dr. Beardsley just described a few minutes ago, providing a way in which that we have additional staff with each of these cohorts that will pay attention to the students who are in those cohorts to make sure that they are getting the support that they need. And then the last system, which is really related also to a sense of accountability that we need to maintain, which is that we are giving, our school leaders are going to be giving instructional feedback, both in the remote space and for those who are in person. So we have to make sure that there's continued efficacy around our commitment, and that we know that we are following what we are saying that we're doing, and making good on that for our students.
Thank you, Dr. Kelgati. I think we have another question that falls in Terrence's wheelhouse. This one may not be as deep, but will lockers be used by students? Will they be able to carry backpacks? What about personal belongings and school supplies?
So we've been working very closely, again, as you've heard, with the Illinois Department of Health and also our Director for Health Services, Bernice Judd. And so really, based on the feedback we received, to the greatest extent possible, lockers will not be used at all. We understand that there may be a point where they need to be used, but we are really looking to say that they do not need to be used unless, and if they were to be used potentially, that students would need to be accessing them with a 6 feet apart guideline in place. But again, our plan is that really there should be no use of lockers because of the level of impact that could have in terms of health and research and resources.
Thank you, Andalib. Next question. I am concerned for the safety of teachers, staff, and their families. How have teachers, staff, and their unions responded to this plan? What if more families opt for the in-person pathway than can be accommodated by those teachers and staff who are available to be in the buildings in person? Dr. Horton, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but probably worth repeating.
Yes, we've had a great partnership. I can honestly say this is the most that I've been able to work with a union collaboratively with getting genuine, true feedback with all of our union leaders and also from our union members. We are currently doing town halls, principals led, some that are really great, sharing information. And I also myself are spending time with the individual schools, getting questions very similar to these, but hearing it from our teachers. And I would say, as far as the support of the plan, they're pretty supportive of what we're doing because we have really taken compassion to their desires or their concerns, I should say, as humans. We're not setting them up to say you must come back if you can't provide X, Y, Z. We know this is a very scary time. It is unprecedented. I know we hear that a lot. So we've gotten support. And again, if we have families right now, as we're looking at our data, we have more families that are opting to come back in person than to actually be remote. But again, if we don't have the staff, which is not looking like we're going to have enough to cover all of the requests, but we will prioritize our marginalized students. So I just wanted to mention, to state that it's starting with our staff and our student safety in mind. And that's the direction in which we're heading with our choice.
Thanks, Dr. Horton. Question from Sherry Fisher at Dewey. For in-person learning, what kind of health screenings of students, teachers, and staff will be conducted and how often?
Sure, I'll take this one, Melissa. Students and staff will engage in a self or a parent would do a self-certification and symptom screening process every day. Before entering the school building, they would also have their temperature taken. Students arriving by bus would have their temperature checked prior to boarding by an aide. And then students arriving by car would have their temperature checked in the car so that they don't enter the building. And then a responsible adult could take them home without possible further spread of the virus in the building.
Thanks, Romy. A question from parent Ed Nichols. Why can't you offer permanent e-learning with teachers using video to teach until the end of the pandemic and everything has been resolved?
So, to this question, we could provide e-learning throughout the year. Yet what we understand is that e-learning or remote learning does work well for some children, but it does not meet, in some cases, the needs of all of our learners. And so our current plan is to provide choice and to really try to provide the best learning environment to meet the needs of our families and our students and our educators.
Thank you, Stacy. Parent shared, I want to echo the comment board member Rebecca Mendoza made about creating community through shared district curriculum. The superintendent of the Baltimore Public Schools has recently shared that she has identified certain teachers across the district to create recorded content for all students at that grade level. For example, this might address Rebecca's point. It would also free up other teachers to be spending time in one-on-one and small group instruction or check in with students and families. Are these types of instructional options being considered?
So we are considering some of those options. We, as Dr. Cagliotti mentioned earlier, we've done some work to strengthen our curricular resources, including a new math curriculum in K8, and strengthening the video resources associated with our English language arts curriculum across the board. We are also looking at the possibility of kind of curating video content in other content areas, depending upon kind of our feasibility and our educator assignments. And so this is something that we are considering as well. We do want our educators to have that time and opportunity to be engaging live with our kids, small group, and to be following up and providing feedback on how kids are doing.
Thank you. Romy, I'm hoping that you can take this next question from a parent at King Arts. Our 3 children all have special needs. 2 in particular need in-person instruction to benefit from education. I have to work, so I cannot do that during the day. How will you meet these needs on a daily basis for your students with IEPs?
Yep. Thank you. This is a difficult question, and I know many of our families are grappling with this, and I'm sorry about my dog barking in the background. I know we're all trying to balance schedules and also support learning at home. Student engagement and student access to learning is a top priority for all of our students, and especially our most vulnerable students, which includes our students with IEPs and 504 plans. Students will continue to receive instruction via pre-recorded videos, online learning platforms, and more synchronous or teletherapy learning opportunities, which we're hoping will require less parent involvement. In addition, we will be utilizing our paraprofessionals more efficiently to support students. And then the other thing that we're looking at is talking to many of our community partners to see how we might be able to connect resources with families at home that can provide any additional support. Last, I just would want to encourage families to work directly with their school teams to ensure that any concerns that are arising, that we can work with you and problem solve best we can to support each child and family's individual circumstance.
Thank you, Romy. A question from Melody. Are you hoping that families that are able to keep children at home do so to make room for families that need school to return to work?
I would say to that question, it's a family choice. We really need true choice and decision making around what families would like to do. But it would be honorable for our families knowing that we can't house all of our students who have the means and the resources to do so, to support us with doing that. But if not, we will make a decision that will allow us again to support all of our students to the best level of their resource and what they have access to. But if families choose to mark as a return, it gives us a piece of data that we'll know as we get more staff and more space, more staff feeling safe for the return, we would be able to potentially open up our door. So I leave that up to the individual family to do that, but knowing that we are limited on access to some of our teachers and some of our key staff.
Thanks, Dr. Horton. Is there a plan for supporting students on the remote learning pathway from a social emotional standpoint?
So we are building in regular social emotional learning as part of our daily learning experience. And so part of the reasoning for the morning check-ins in K-5 in the afternoon, and then some of the intentional creation of these opportunities in middle school, is to ensure that students are creating opportunities to build community and connection and to be supported in social emotional learning and development. And that is kind of at a whole class level. Romy may be able to speak a little bit additionally to any individual supports from there.
Oh, sure. And then of course our social workers and our school counselors, our psychologists are available and saints and amazing at what they do, and connecting also not just within the school, but connecting families with resources outside that can be supportive.
Thanks, Romy and Stacy. What will the district's grading policy be this school year? And will it be the same for students on the remote and in-person learning pathways?
So the grading policies will be the same on the remote learning pathway as well as the on-site learning pathway. And currently we know that we are moving back towards our more traditional grading policies, since we will be making learning devices available to all students in the kindergarten through the 8th grade. There may be some minor revisions, but we will be returning to something that is more familiar to our past practices than our spring practices.
Thank you. That's helpful. Dr. Kilgatti, can you talk a little bit more about cleaning procedures and if the district is going to be hiring additional custodial staff to help sanitize and disinfect the building each and every day?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. Earlier, I alluded to the importance of periodic cleaning that's supposed to happen during the day. I would say that we have one of the things that we did this summer is we purchased electrostatic machines, which will assist our district custodians to with the disinfectant process daily. Also, in regards to additional hires, in the summertime, we do hire additional staff who help support us. If we determine that it's necessary, absolutely, it's something that we would look to do. Currently, we do have extra staff that are hired in the summer, and we are looking to help, hoping to keep them on after this summer to continue with the support needed for our schools.
Thank you. Dr. Green, while we're on the topic of buildings, can you share a little bit more? Does the district know how many students and educators can safely be accommodated in all buildings while maintaining that recommended 6-foot distance?
Yes, this information has been collected in accordance with CDC IDPH guidelines. The 6-foot distancing across and in between students has been probably some of the most consistent information that we've had. And so we're now in the process of trying to operationalize this information for the feasibility in the context of each local school site. So I believe you heard Dr. Horton reference a Let's Get It Right team. That team would then be charged with taking those recommendations to ensure that we could, in fact, provide those safe distances and those requirements for student and staff safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Green. I'm going to take a moment here. I'm following my email and have received a couple questions already. So we are recording tonight's town hall. So this will be available on our website as early as tomorrow. So people that were not able to tune in will be able to watch it. In addition, we are creating a list of all of the questions that have been answered today. So we are working to put that together in both English and Spanish. As Dr. Horton mentioned earlier, again, we've received hundreds and hundreds of questions. So we are working to memorialize all of this information and put it on our website that we can continue to update. So know that those resources are also going to be available after we end here in the next 20 minutes or so. But on to the next question. Stacy, a question from Emily Kirchner at Lincolnwood. Will remote learning include direct instruction from teachers over Zoom?
So remote learning will include live engagements with educators, and in some cases will most likely include live instruction from educators. As I've said earlier tonight, we are focused on the live engagements, and in some cases we will lean more on video recorded instruction, so teachers can be more focused on the interaction with kids and support for students. And so we are looking at kind of the best blend to support our learners and our educators.
Thank you. Another question, will I be given any upfront online learning as a parent based on my child's grade that's going to help support and prepare me with the knowledge that I need to help provide for my children?
I can take that question for us, Melissa. Let me state, I'm going to try to keep my answer brief for the sake of time. I know there's a few others, and I also want to be respectful for Manuel, who's doing an amazing job tracking all of this. So a collaboration between the instructional technology team as well as the family and community engagement team has been underway to ensure that we're able to provide planning and support, to support parent learning of the devices that their students will have access to, the learning platforms, as well as the nuances of video conferencing. So those are being developed. I do suspect that as time goes on and we need to shift and be nimble, we will definitely try to make sure that we have somewhat of a repository of resources for parents. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a question from Paula Casa at Haven. Will children who are in the remote learning pathway be in any classes with children being taught in person? Meaning, will remote learning kids be watching live or videotaped instruction of what's going on in the in-person classroom?
In some cases, that may be a model that your students do encounter. There may be situations where a student who's in the remote learning classroom is enrolled and participates in an on-site classroom and is part of that classroom community.
Thank you. Romy, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but can you talk more about what remote TWE classrooms will look like?
Sure. So remote TWE classrooms will look like other remote learning classrooms with just the obvious difference of language instruction. So remote learning will include units of study designed in Spanish, as well as math and Spanish. Depending on the grade level and the language allocation, some units in social studies and science will also be provided in Spanish. Done.
Thank you. Will teachers have virtual office hours?
So currently what we're working towards is not necessarily that teachers will have virtual office hours, because the instructional expectation and the engagement expectation is larger than in the spring. Yet what we want to do is be able to share with families the best way to contact our educators and the best time to contact educators. So we will not have a similar office hour structure from the spring, yet we will have dedicated time to be able to contact and understand the response expectation from your teacher.
Thank you. A question from Julie Larson at Oakton. What is the thinking behind having a four-day in-person and one-day virtual school week?
So that's a very good question. And so for clarity, we're not in normal circumstances, and we know that teaching is going to look different. Students are going to have some different experiences. And so we wanted to take that virtual day and use it for development, and also to potentially provide students a little less time on screen for the ones that'll be there. But of course, if we're going to do professional learning, we can't have students physically at the school with the teachers while we're doing it. We have a new curriculum that we're pushing out that's so important. I want to thank our T&L team for making this choice, and our union agreeing for a pilot of a new math curriculum in our K-5. And it's going to take some time. The online learning, in order for us to become great, we must always find time to educate ourselves and to educate our staff so that they can become better. So we want to use that day for the purpose of developing and improving what we're delivering. Who knows what's going to happen and when COVID will go away. But the one thing that we want to be prepared for is that our teachers and our students are highly equipped to continue to learn and be engaged in these environments. So thank you.
Thank you. Will students and teachers be required to get tested for COVID-19 if they need to quarantine before they come back to school?
I'll take this. So we can't mandate COVID tests, nor can we guarantee that they'll be available when we need them. But if a staff member or a student were to answer yes to any of those self-certification questions, for example, they came into close contact with someone who tested positive, if they traveled to a hot spot, or something like that, then we would ask the staff member or student to get a test if they could, or quarantine for 14 days following the date of contact or the risk of exposure. And then students or staff must be fever-free with no fever-reducing medication for 24 hours. If a parent or caregiver is unable to contact a health provider, then our health services director will consult with the family, our local health department, our school health office, and building administrators to determine if the student needs to remain at home or if they're ready to return to school based off of adhering to all our public health guidance.
Thank you. Dr. Horton, can you speak a little bit more around the COVID testing and whether or not the district is exploring any partnerships to provide COVID testing to students and staff?
So yes, we are in partnership. I want to thank Evanston Live and Percy Berger for connecting us with North Shore Hospital. We're actually in discussion to be able to set up stations. They have a program there where we could, our staff, not students, we can't mandate that, and we can't mandate staff, but we will be paying for staff testing if they're interested in being tested for COVID-19. So that partnership is, we've been in discussion the last week, and we're at the process right now where we're going to begin to talk about contract. So yes.
Awesome, thank you. Question from Ted Anderson. Can there be better contact email management where parents are not inundated with multiple emails? Will remote learning have a routine and focus and not be a free-for-all where parents get bombarded at all hours from multiple teachers and District 65 entities?
So our plan is focused on creating a tighter routine. And we are also looking at ways to continue to improve our communication, consolidate our communications, and also make the type of information that parents and guardians said was important to them to be available as we come into the fall. And this is still a work in process for us.
Thank you. Dr. Kilgatti, can you talk a little bit more about what we envision the morning arrival process looking like? How will you be able to take all students' temperatures? And what if a student has a fever? How will that be handled?
It's an important question that I know that's actually one that we've spent a lot of time, and we've just spent the last couple of days actually just doing some, I would call it field testing around what's the pacing. We want to avoid a situation where we're going to see long lines of blocks of students waiting to get temperature testing before they enter the building. So a couple of things I will say is that we've purchased these systems that make it a lot faster. So a thermometer, instead of that, it's a monitor where we're going to have a security officer or a staff member, I guess you could say, working with the health clerk or a nurse to be at the front office. So to be able to take these temperature gauges every day. We will have, essentially based on our work today, more than likely, most schools will have 1 to 2 entry points. One would be where students who are walking to the school would enter and would have their temperature taken. And then bus riders, we would be asking for bus riders. There'll be a bus aide on each bus, and those individuals would be, temperature testing would happen before they enter they get on the bus, or once they get on the bus, those are done right then and there. And then the last one would be that students arriving in a car and working with the health department, it seems that it would be most practical to ensure that students are getting their temperature taken while they're actually in the car before getting out of the car, so that if there's a situation where we want to try to reduce everything we've been reading about and learning from the health department is that we want to reduce the amount of potential exposure that multiple people could have. And so practice like having a temperature taken in the car before the person exits the car can help reduce that multiple individuals being exposed to the virus. So we are looking, those are some of the things that are being considered pretty significantly. The second thing, part of the question is, what would happen if somebody's has a fever and they're at school already? So we have identified that there will need to be 3 spaces. One would be like a waiting room, so to speak, or an isolation room that's open, that'll be staffed and supervised with somebody in PPE. To ensure that the individual that has been registered with 100.4 temperature or above is in that safe space and is not either risk of exposing others. And so we'll have that, as well as other spaces where students who are, let's say, going for routine checkups or have to leave the day are also in a separate space from the ones who are facing potentially COVID symptoms.
Thank you, Dr. Kilgatti. Next question, and this was one that hits home for me as a parent of a child with food allergies. It sounds like students will be eating meals in their classrooms. How are you going to accommodate children with food allergies?
I'll take this one, Melissa. So each classroom or area where food is consumed will have a designated allergy-free area. Again, I want to reiterate, this is our best thinking at the time when we've been trying to think about how to accommodate something like food and nutrition. On a case-by-case basis, those areas may need to be expanded to entire rooms. That would be something that would be also a part of our Let's Get It Right teamwork. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, we had a number of questions come up related to HVAC in the building. I have heard from teachers that HVAC is an issue in some schools and classrooms. What steps will you take to ensure that the systems are working properly? What can you do to promote airflow in rooms with no windows?
Good question. So the district maintenance team is following CDC and the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration and Air Conditioning guidelines as it relates to air filtration facilities. For example, we are ensuring that we are planning to upgrade all our filters to the higher level of MERV levels. Furthermore, where necessary, we are going to plan to partner with HVAC consulting firms with longstanding knowledge about our facilities.
Thank you, Andalib. Romy, are there going to be more social workers available to accommodate students suffering from PTSD because of the pandemic we are currently facing?
Sure. So I think it's really important that we frame this in a way that accommodating the needs of our students or meeting the needs of our students who might be experiencing PTSD, trauma, grief, or anything that is associated with the pandemic or anything else right now is not just the sole work of our social workers. It's all of our work. It's all of our educators and everyone who interacts with a student. So with that said, our social workers are amazing supports for our students and school communities. But at this time, our plan is not to hire more social workers, but we are providing more support, training, resources for all of our educators and our families to be able to support our students' social emotional needs. So as Stacy mentioned, these will be built into daily practices. And then we're also collaborating with outside agencies and community partners to provide any additional supports for our students and families.
Thank you, Romy. So this next question I'm going to ask in a couple parts because there are a couple here. With regard to the staff being available to work in the buildings, has the district established a cutoff for the number of yeses needed to actually get kids back in the building? First question. And the second question is, if there are not enough teachers willing to go back into the building, do we just do e-learning until there is a vaccine or the virus miraculously goes away?
Thanks for the question, Melissa. I think Dr. Horton spoke to this a little bit earlier. You know, we've asked parents to select the best learning options for their students and that they do that by July 31st. We've also asked educators to inform us whether or not they're able to return to work in person. So we really need all of this information in order to determine if we have enough educators to support students who would be reporting to school in person as their parents have selected from them. The other piece is something Dr. Green spoke to, which is just in terms of capacity, in terms of how many people can occupy spaces in our facilities. So once we have all this information to put together, then we'll be able to determine whether or not we can safely accommodate all of the students whose parents have asked for them to come back in person. But I think as it's been alluded to, we know that that's going to be a significant challenge. So we will have to prioritize which students return. In terms of the second part of that question, you know, there's a possibility that we're going to have parents who want their children to return in person, and we're not going to have enough educators to accommodate that. And so we are going to prioritize, as it's been stated before, the in-person learning options for those students who meet the priority criteria that we discussed in scenario C that was recommended by part of the task force, as well as what's been recommended by ISB.
Thanks, Beatrice. And then the third part of that question was, what happens when and if there is a shortfall in terms of the number of special education staff?
Yeah, so, we're going to be looking at our current staffing to determine what supports we are able to provide. And if there are unique circumstances where we require additional support and we don't have the internal capacity to meet those needs of the children, then we'll look to see if we need to hire additional staff or possibly contract through an outside agency.
Thank you. So this question, Stacy, it was touched on a bit earlier, but will there be flexibility in remote learning around our schedules so that we can continue to work? Will we get assignments in advance to allow and accommodate for parents' time constraints?
So our current planning does include the upfront assignments at the beginning of the week. So people have notice of the work that students will be expected to be engaging in and submitting to educators. And our current plan is also that if there is live instruction, that will be recorded and made available so it can be accessed at other times. We are also looking at the right balance of flexible deadlines for work in order to kind of keep an accountability measure with flexibility for our students and our families.
Thank you. So this is a question from Barry Doyle. One of the areas that was covered in the presentation last week was what was going to be done in regard to bus transportation. And if I understood that correctly, the district is going to be needing more buses to get kids to school, and that kids are going to need to be spread out on buses. Has the district secured enough buses and drivers to actually get kids to school, special ed and otherwise? If the district doesn't already have those locked up and ends up failing to secure enough drivers and vehicles to provide the required bus service, what sort of impact might that have on the reopening of schools?
Barry, thank you for that question. That is so important. So we are trying to get ahead of this, and yes, it's already a shortage in bus drivers prior to the pandemic, and we know that this could very well be the case as we move forward and with our planning to reopen. But what we're doing as a district, again, I would like to say that we are reaching out to community partners to help us design potential locations. I'll use the 5th Ward and potentially the 2nd Ward as well, where they're working with the City of Evanston, Northwestern, the YMCA McGaw, Family Focus, and YOU to actually potentially house our students for if they were to return or be in remote. Those are our most marginalized students. And so knowing that a lot of our students are bused from the 5th Ward, this will potentially help us to not have to bus, and that they could be within their own community and also minimize their exposure to COVID on a bus, and then also potentially going into a school. Even though we're going to be following the guidelines to a T, this does a lot more for us. And like, this is going to take, in all honesty, and everyone knows this is a full-blown community effort for us to pull this off. So that's how we want to approach it, because it's going to be a challenge finding those bus drivers. And also our budget is potentially could take a major hit. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Horton. Question from Charlotte Winters at JEH. If we choose the virtual option and the COVID numbers improve substantially, or a vaccine becomes available, will we be able to send our student back to in-person learning?
I'll take this question. Hey there, Charlotte. This is in reference to the community reimagining document, and it's basically a parent or caregiver can at any time request that their child be moved from remote learning to in-person learning. However, please note that the children must continue to participate in remote learning until the end of the current trimester. That is including if a miraculous vaccine or cure happened. As long as the request can be honored, children can begin in-person learning on the first day of the next trimester, as long as 2 weeks notice was given. So that's kind of a policy we'll need to put in place just to ensure that there is time for the technical aspects of moving students and prepping classrooms and teachers, et cetera.
Thank you, Dr. Green. We have time for, we'll just do a couple more questions here. I know that it is our 7:30 limit, so we'll just do about 2 more. Will children who opt to return in-person learning still have the opportunity to participate in specials, gym, art, music, etc.?
We can make that one quick. The answer is yes.
All right. So next question. If schools do not open, how will the district meet the needs of children of essential workers? Children of essential workers, including teachers, have less parental presence to support their education at home, and their parents may have to reduce their essential work to stay home and care for them.
I'll take this one. You're correct, Carrie. That is the dilemma at hand. It is why we have, thankfully, some criteria that we've developed collectively in our superintendent's task force around scenario C. I mentioned before in terms of how we would prioritize. I think it also bears to acknowledge Dr. Horton's most recent statement about partnering collectively across the city to ensure that we have all hands on deck to make sure that we can support students as many as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Green. And we will maybe do one last question since Stacy was so quick in her response. Is there a support from a teacher to help with remote? Will it be less support than in the spring or more? If our assigned teacher is teaching in class, who will be the ones that help the remote students?
So every student will be assigned a classroom teacher, a primary educator, K-5, a primary educator, middle school, and an educator for each of their content areas. And that's the individual that will be in charge of supporting the student in their learning and the particular classes that they are assigned. And so there will be a good level of support for students across the day and across content.
Thank you, Stacy. And before Dr. Horton wraps us up, I just wanted to remind everybody that this recording will be available on our website as early as tomorrow. And again, we are working to put the FAQ together of the responses to the questions tonight, in addition to questions that we have received from educators and those that we were just not able to get to this evening. So thank you.
I want to say thank you to all of the families and teachers and staff, community members, community organizations, the city of Evanston, the board, my great team, our great team for fighting this fight. This is challenging. It's keeping us up late at night, and I think my daughter pointed out I have more gray hairs in my beard than I've had, but it's okay. I wouldn't change this. This is the work. And it's even though it's challenging, I'm still having fun because we're working on a plan to make sure that our children are exposed to the best quality education that we can give them. I want to close out by saying we lost a legend in the civil rights movement a couple of weeks ago, or actually last week. And I just want to close out with a quote. And I know you're familiar with it, but I want to understand as we're making our decisions, we operate this way. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Rest in peace, John Lewis. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight.